Icebound Slam is finally banned, and that means the dominance of Watermill is finally over. Right? Yeah, I'm sorry guys. Watermill is still an extremely powerful deck in the meta, and one you should absolutely not assume is gone just because Icebound Slam is banned. And today in this deck profile, we're going to look at the newest, spiciest variation of this deck, Watermill Vanitas. Let's jump right into it. What's up everyone, it's Dan with Main Deck, and welcome back to one last deck profile for the Mortal Ambition season of Grand Archive. What an interesting season it's been. We've seen the rise and dominance now of Watermill to the point where a lot of regionals, including the one we just held here in our own hometown, have had top cuts that have frankly just had a lot of Watermill players. I believe at our regional we had 3 Watermill in the top 4 and then 1 Water Allies as well. The interesting thing about this season though, while Watermill has been very dominant, is that there have been a number of interesting variations and takes on it. Most recently with the release of Alchemical Revolution Ultra Edition, we got Vanitas level 3, and that has ushered in actually a really exciting and interesting new form of the deck with Watermill Vanitas. Now, Icebound Slam just got banned, and one thing I wanted to kind of hit home with this video, this deck profile today, is how this deck frankly doesn't change a lot taking out Icebound Slam. And well, yes, losing Icebound Slam is going to remove some of those more, I don't know, free wins that I guess it would get from hitting for 8 and milling 5 and just having an extremely explosive and powerful first turn. That said, the way the meta has adapted with all these water decks, that has not really been the case in a lot of the matches you play. Like for example, in that top 4, I don't think anybody was getting off in Icebound Slam turn 1 because there have been too many Song of Frost, too many Tidal Locks, too many Frostbinds that are just flying around, stopping the Icebound Slam from happening. And so this deck has been able to win all these games without always landing Icebound Slam either. So again, while it's losing some of the free wins it'll get throughout a tournament, Watermill is still an extremely powerful archetype, and one that here at the end of AMB and then going into Abyssal Heaven, it's gotta be on your radar as one of the best decks in the metagame. And today, the Vanitas version that we're looking at, I think is one of the strongest versions that you should at least be playtesting against, if not considering playing yourself at the next regional or Ascent or Store Champs or whatever you're gonna play at. So in this video, it's going to be a deck profile where we've actually looked at a lot of these cards before. I'm going to reference, and I'll put the links up here to our Watermill Arasana version and then our deep dive video as well that went into a ton of the strategies here. What I want to talk about today is just what Vanitas brings to the table to make this deck a little different. Now, this is just like the other deck, a water control deck, but we are, instead of running Arasana, we are running some spicy Vanitas level 1, 2, and 3 in this list. Now, what does Vanitas bring that Arasana doesn't have access to? Vanitas, unlike Arasana, is actually going to be a little weaker against certain decks in the metagame, not quite as strong against allies, not quite as strong as anything that's putting allies on the board, including things like slimes and some variants of fire aggro. But what Vanitas gives you is wind, and that is huge. And then also an extremely powerful, honestly, almost busted level 3 in the new Vanitas Dominus Rex. Now, Vanitas level 1 does nothing in this deck. His only on enter is only when there's another wind element card in his lineage. You're going to glimpse 4. We don't have that. And when I say he does nothing, I mean he unlocks wind for you, which is actually one of the biggest things, which allows us to run cards like, now this is the version of the list that we've played the most is using just Scatter Essence, although there have been some really fascinating versions of this list playing things like fitting in things like Dream Fairy, fitting in things like Innervate Agility, and a variety actually of other powerful cards. That's going to be really important to remember going into Abyssal Heaven when we have new decks like Guoja that are putting out spell-shrouded beasts that are really tough to deal with, but wind always has some of the answers. So that is actually another point in favor of keeping this Watermill Vanitas in your mind as we're going into this metagame, a deck that can play two different, the two most controlling elements of the game in one deck certainly has a lot to think about. Now, after you get to level 1, where does the fun really begin? Vanitas Convergent Ruin is the first level of Vanitas where he's going to actually get an attack built into his champion. Now, if you're newer to the game and you're not familiar with this, champions don't normally have attacks built in. This allows Vanitas to simply swing without having to play an attack card, without having to put a weapon into play. However, he also is able to use this attack in addition to weapons or attack cards in order to deal a lot of damage. Now, Vanitas level 2 Convergent Ruin has an ability that says whenever you activate a spell card, Vanitas' next attack this turn is going to get +1 power, but it's only an attack without a weapon. You do have to keep that in mind. When we had Icebound Slam, this is actually a really, really cheeky thing you could do where you could use Icebound Slam in conjunction with Vanitas' attack, and a pumped up attack could get you actually all the way, well, you don't even need to pump it, but you can get up to 10 or more damage with that single attack. But as long as you hit 9, that was going to matter for getting Vanitas Dominus Rex out. And as long as you hit 7 or more damage with Vanitas Convergent Ruin, you're actually going to cause your opponent to have to pay 1 on all of the materializes on the next turn. Now, that said, Vanitas level 2 doesn't usually hit for that much damage, and now that Icebound Slam is gone, that line is take it out of your head. It's not even a thing you need to worry about anymore. You're almost never ever going to hit for that much damage with Vanitas level 2. But instead, what you're going to want to do is use the power of Vanitas level 3 Dominus Rex. And I would say largely that this character card, this card right here, is one of the things that really pushes this deck into being the powerhouse that it is. I think this could be playable without that, but you might as well just play with Polaris and Artisan instead. But now that we have Dominus Rex, we have unlocked some really spiky, really powerful lines and a lot of sort of long game inevitability. Vanitas level 3 says you may activate this card from your material deck. It costs 3 less to activate for every 3 damage your champion is dealt to other champions this turn. So that's where if you are able to spike that big damage at level 2, you can actually get a reduced level up. But the coolest thing about this is he's basically got a dungeon guide built in. He's able to level up during your main phase by simply just activating it right out of your material deck. You don't need to play a dungeon guide. You just go, you know what? I think I'm going to level up right now. And you throw it out of your material deck on there. You have to pay all costs, but this is Watermill. So as you guys know, we are absolutely packed to the brim with floating memory or ways to put a bunch of float in our yard, which means that it's really easy to get free levels to 3 with Vanitas. And now once you're at level 3, notice that he's got that 25 health, a nice health buffer to have in our deck that when we were playing Arsana would sometimes die at 19 or 21 health. But now we have this Vanitas that has 25 health and then has on champion hit. Cards that opponent materializes cost 1 more to materialize until the beginning of your next turn, in addition to his big 3 damage attack built onto him. So he's got the level 2 abilities, but instead of 1 damage, he's got 3 damage, +2. And instead of on champion hit, if he dealt some inordinately large amount of damage, he just always gets that whenever he connects for any amount of damage. That has been really, really crazy in practice. That's the reason why we brought Vanitas decks to Ascent Utrecht, to the regional in Belgium. We've been playing Vanitas decks for a little while in and out, but that we've found it consistently has been a spiky, powerful play that has completely changed the game. As long as you're connecting with Vanitas, your opponent often doesn't even want to materialize anything at all. And some really funny things can happen too if you can get to Vanitas level 3 quickly and start punching, for example, like a Fire Lorraine that's on a Fire Spirit and hasn't leveled to Lorraine yet. If they try to level to Lorraine, it's going to 1, cost them 2 to materialize Lorraine level 1. And then her on enter will let them materialize a 0-cost sword, which they're then going to have to pay 1 for because it is still being materialized during their turn. So Vanitas level 3 is pretty crazy, has some really, really strong interactions. It makes your opponent simply not want to even play any 0-cost regalia, let alone doing things like leveling up and having to spend 2, 3, or even 4 to get that level up. He taxes your opponent really hard while he's punching in damage, and he can even just attack allies to get him off the board if that's what you need to do to win the game too. He's super, super powerful. Honestly, one of the better level 3 champions I think we've ever seen in the game. And I think he's going to be here for quite a long time. If you haven't picked up your copy of Vanitas level 3 yet, make sure you do. And if you have a CSR copy, hey, get in touch with me. I'm kind of digging this. It's Honshu art. It's gorgeous. Look, he's got like a 26 pack. Okay, he's awesome. This is such a cool card. But anyway, back to the deck profile. So Vanitas is a very, very powerful champion to play, and the reason that we love playing this version of Watermill with Vanitas the most is this access to wind gives us that sort of inevitability, that damage, that tax, and against other water decks, he brings out two factors that are extremely powerful at beating a water-packed metagame. One of them is that with Scepter of Lumina and Vanitas, you are going to be able to spike crazy chunks of damage sometimes when you go to level 2 on your turn using some float. Do some shenanigans. You know, sometimes you're going to do things like you're going to refracting missile them for some extra damage in your Rex step, which is going to give a +1 to Vanitas' attack that turn. Now keep in mind that +1 carries over. When he levels to level 3, it's just a floating buff sitting on his champion. As long as he attacks without a weapon that turn, no matter which level he's on, he's going to get +1 damage for every spell that you have cast that turn, every spell you've activated. So you can do all sorts of things like Revitalizing Cleanse is something I like to do sometimes in Rex Step, just to cycle some cards, draw a card, and get that +1 damage on Vanitas. When you leveled to 2, you did 4 damage with Scepter. However many spells you play, let's say you play 1 or 2 spells on your turn just to do a few things, now you have +2 damage on that attack. Then you take either some float that you have set up, or you pop a Polar Depths to mill a bunch of float. It's super viable just to pop Polar Depths earlier in Vanitas than you normally would like hold out for in Arasana, because just putting some free float in the yard is going to push crazy damage. But you will then do whatever you need to, either banishing cards from memory, banishing float, whatever you want, to level to 3 on your main phase. Then Scepter does 4 more damage to the opponents. That's 8 so far. Then you can punch with Vanitas for 3, plus if you, for example, cast 2 spells, plus 2 more. So that's a spike of suddenly 8 plus 3 plus 2, so like 13 damage out of nowhere on the opponent. If you've already hit them with their Frostworn Paladins a couple of times, maybe those Rimesalt Bishops started rumbling, got a little bit of damage in, suddenly a lot of champions are looking really close to death, and it doesn't take a lot more. Even maybe just another turn of kind of punching them for 3, or maybe next turn you're going to get that Tidehole or Claymore out and then do a punch for 8 with this thing just to close the game off. Or maybe you've been holding on to that Stratagem. Another cool thing to note is Stratagem is a spell, so you can actually do things like at level 2, cast that Stratagem, and then banish a bunch of float, do a bunch of damage. You don't even care if you banish all your float from your yard just to do like 9-12 damage to your opponent. Then take the cards you put down to activate Stratagem, use them to level to Vanitas level 3, and add in an additional chunk of 3 damage, actually 4 damage, because guess what? Stratagem's a spell. Add that on top of the damage you do with Stratagem. Vanitas has enabled all of these extra lines of damage to the point where we've actually started cutting down our Stratagems. We did, I believe in Utrecht, we still were running 4 Stratagems, but afterwards we saw like there's a Stratagem less list. The one that actually made it into top 8, I believe, was the one that had no Stratagems in it. And the reason people are starting to cut Stratagems, or at least cut it down like we are here, is because the Scepter of Lumina Vanitas lines act a lot like Stratagems, where you're just going to spend that float instead to push a bunch of chunky damage out. And Vanitas, every time you get to attack with Vanitas, that is like banishing 1 float. That's the amount of damage, at least, you would be banishing 1 float to Stratagem to deal. Instead, you just banish 3 float right away, then punch for 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever. And you get a lot of the damage back. So those of us were saying, you know what, I'm going to cut Stratagem entirely. Let's put in some more wind interaction. We don't love that. And I would say, in my experience, running Stratagem is still best because it enables more kill lines. Especially, I love the line going Stratagem into Vanitas level 3. I think that is a really potent line that you don't want to completely shut off. But certainly is looking more viable now here. We brought Stratagem down to 3 in this list and said, yeah, it's okay. Let's just have some more interaction and stuff instead. And that has worked out very well. Now, the other reason that we like having Vanitas in this wind is the access to Scatter Essence. Is the other reason this deck is super good into the water metagame right now, because of course these decks are all running Fractal of Rain, they're running Fractal of Polar Depths, and then you've got Astra Arasana lists that are sometimes running the Fragmented Spirit, Merlin running Fragmented Spirit. We have Tristan coming back a little bit. Main deck Taylor's been on the Tristan train, trying to beat up on the Watermill decks with that. And even there, it's not good in the early game, and that's really when you want the Scatter Essence. But it is going to kill Phantasias. It is going to kill, it's going to kill Shadows, which are Phantasias. It's easy to forget that that's the case, but Scatter Essence can hit your opponent's Ominous Shadows when they're playing Tristan as well. So it's a very versatile card, and the biggest actually flaw of Scatter Essence or any win cards in this deck prior to the Icebound Slam ban was that Icebound Slam would get less damage if you happen to hit those win cards. The reason we pared down the win in the list to only Scatter Essence was because at least when you Icebound Slammed and hit Scatter Essence, you hit a float. You had that constellation like, okay, I missed the 8 damage, but I know I got at least 1 float out of it. Now, there's really no penalty to having the Scatter Essences in here. It makes your Polar Depths just a tiny bit less spicy sometimes, but again, it's a float in the yard, so you're not too mad about that. We took out the Icebound Slams, and what we actually replaced them with in here were things like shoring up, I was famously running, I don't know if it's famous, but I wasn't running any water barriers in Utrecht, forcing my opponent basically to play around water barrier without having it, but I definitely wanted to have it sometimes too, so it allows us to do things like fit the water barriers back in. We get to up the Awakened Deacons and up the Primordial Rituals up to 4 of each. These are kind of our new level 1 package, new turn 1 package when you don't have Slam anymore, but instead we can just go, okay, you know what, I'll play Awakened Deacon, hold back a Primordial Ritual, and get just a million float in the yard right away. That's a totally reasonable line to play. Maybe some of you were cutting things like Revitalizing Cleanse, which I still do not like cutting. This card is too good, and making sure you don't lose to Fire Aggro, making sure Slimes can't just kill you out of nowhere, and all sorts of random decks. Just getting a Cleanse off is usually really good, so you can maybe fit some of those in now too. Or maybe you were one of the gamers who wasn't fitting in the Cerulean Decrees, didn't like taxing your opponent for free. I think it's absolutely cracked, and you definitely have to run these. Or maybe you weren't fitting in things like Tidal Locks or Frostbinds, whichever negation that you wanted to run. This allows you to have room for all of this stuff now. Actually, losing Icebound Slam, not the worst thing in the world, because look at we didn't have to put in anything bad in here. We just were like, okay, we'll shore up some of the cards that were already really cracked, that make water as powerful at controlling the game as it currently is. And that's the list that we ended up with. There's even cards in the sideboard that I think some of you would prefer to run in the main, and absolutely feel free to do that. You have a little bit of space now. You can do that. Did you like Frozen Dismissal in the main? We're side gamers with Frozen Dismissal, but Frozen Dismissal is very good against certain matchups. It can definitely help. Speaking of which, again, this list is less good against ally lists, but then out of the side, things like Frozen Dismissal, things like Glacial Evocation, those will actually help you shore up that ally match a little bit more. More cleanses, always a good option. Song of Frost in there now. We still have, we don't have Icebound anymore. We still have Tristan running around. We still have Fire Aggro lists sometimes that are going to try and spike you with Rending Flames. There's still plenty of things that you do care to Song of Frost. There's some cheeky Diana lists running around too, so I would still not run 0 copies of Song of Frost, but I like it in the side. Always been good with that. And we had the extra copy of Strategem over here on the side as well to move in when you really just need to get that combo kill. And of course, Nullifying Mirror for those wind decks, for the Razor Gales. When you need to be able to disable things like Veiling Breeze, that's going to be there for you. Outside of that stuff, though, I mean, this is really very much like the Watermill list that we already covered, the Water Arasana list, but I hope you've been able to see some of the spicy lines that Vanitas and, things like Scatter Essence bring there. There is a lot of room to explore here as well, though, like I mentioned. Do you want to put Innervate Agility? Dream Fairy, Arrow Trap is looking like a spicy new card, and Ensnaring Fumes, another card that I think is going to be very, very good moving into the new Abyssal Heaven metagame. I think Watermill Vanitas gives you the room to be able to play these sort of flexible control pieces that you need, and without Icebound Slam now, you're not really punished for putting a lot more wind in there. Now, you don't want to go too crazy, because you do need to be able to play the game at level 1 when you don't have wind unlocked, and you are still not going to want to totally kill your Fractal of Polar Depths, because, like I said, it's absolutely still crazy to Polar Depths yourself, mill a bunch of float, and now use that to freely level up to Vanitas. Get that damage off of Scepter, so you can feel free to just pop it and draw those cards as soon as you want to. But there is plenty of room to explore, and as we go into the Abyssal Heaven metagame, if there's one deck that I'm going to be looking at right away, when I'm testing any of these new Guoja decks, these new Daochan decks, any of the new decks, the Jin, the Kongming, whatever we're going to start to see now from the new set, I'm going to start by testing it against this list right here. And if it can't beat Watermill Vanitas, it is not really a contender for the main deck team to play at any of the upcoming ascents. So you got to be aware of this deck. It has not gone. It is far from it. It's still actually extremely powerful and has been one of the kind of coolest and one of the decks that has the most room to explore going to the next metagame. So I hope you guys enjoyed that one. Let me know your thoughts on Watermill Vanitas, the metagame in general, or any questions that you guys have about how to play this deck or anything down in the comments below. Love to engage with you guys as we move into the end of spoiler season for Abyssal Heaven and then the launch of the new set. It's always the most exciting time of the year, and I'm looking forward to seeing many of you at the very first ascent of the new metagame at Ascent Seattle in just about a month from now. So can't wait, going to be a ton of fun. Hope you guys enjoyed this one, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.